6:12 a.m. The alarm. You reach over and silence it. Lie there. Longer than you meant to. The ceiling is the same ceiling it was yesterday morning. There is a weight that arrived before the alarm. You did not choose it. It was there when you woke. The way weather is there. Not sudden, not dramatic. Just present. Maybe it has a name. Maybe it is something you have been carrying for weeks without solving. Maybe it is smaller than that. The ordinary pressure of a day that is already forming before you have gotten up to meet it. Most mornings begin this way. A body rising because it must. A mind activating its list before the feet have touched the floor. The day takes possession of the hours before a single deliberate word has been spoken. What if that was not how it had to begin? Not as a spiritual exercise, not as a religious performance, as a structural sequence, 2,000 years old, documented in 4 separate Gospels, corroborated by the morning prayer archive of the Dead Sea Scrolls. That every recorded time Jesus used it, what followed was called impossible. That sequence is in the text. It has been in the text since the first manuscripts were copied. It is 3 words long. My name is Nathan. Former high school history teacher, Evansville, Indiana. 12 years at a Catholic school teaching world history and early Christianity. I resigned when the evidence kept leading me somewhere the institution was not prepared to follow. I want to tell you where this investigation started. Not in a library, not at a conference. At my own desk, late, past 11, reading John chapter 11, for reasons that had nothing to do with research. I had a personal reason for being in that chapter that week. I am not going to tell you what it was, but I was reading slowly. The way you read when you are looking for something you cannot name. I reached verses 41 and 42. I read them. I stopped. I read them again. Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. Lazarus was still in the tomb. The stone had only just been rolled away. Nobody had emerged. No miracle had occurred. No evidence existed that anything was going to happen. And Jesus had just said, I thank you that you have heard me. Past tense. Gratitude for what had already happened. Before it happened. I wrote 1 sentence in the margin of my Bible. He thanks before. Then I did what any former history teacher does at 11 o'clock at night when a data point does not fit the model. I opened to Matthew 14, verse 19. Before multiplying the loaves for 5,000 people, looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Look up, give thanks. Act. I opened to John 6, verse 11. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated. Take. Give thanks. Distribute. I opened to Mark 7, verse 34. Before healing the deaf man, Jesus looked up to heaven, deeply sighed, and said, Ephphatha. Look up. Surrender into trust. Speak. 4 gospel accounts, 4 separate authors, 4 distinct situations, a dead man in a tomb, 5,000 people with no food, a single deaf man on a road, a final meal before execution. The sequence before the miracle does not vary. Recognition, gratitude, certainty, not a prayer, not a petition. A structural architecture that precedes every verifiable miracle in the canonical record. I was holding my Bible at 11 o'clock at night, and the word that came to me was not theological, it was architectural. Let me show you what those 3 structural moves actually are. Because the words are simple and the function is not. The first move, recognition. Father, not Lord. Not Adonai, the formal Jewish address for the divine, the name spoken in synagogue, the name inscribed in liturgical texts. The word Jesus uses is Abba, Aramaic. The word a child uses to address a parent in immediate, intimate relationship, not the deference of a subject to a ruler, not the approach of a petitioner to an authority. The direct address of a child who has never doubted access. The first move is not invocation of power. It is orientation to relationship. The second move, gratitude. I thank you that you have heard me. In Greek, Eucharistesis, the same root word that gives Christianity the Eucharist. But the grammatical form is critical. Jesus is not thanking the Father for what is about to happen. He is not expressing hope that the Father will act. The tense is past. The gratitude is for what has already occurred. While Lazarus is still inside the sealed tomb, while the loaves are still 5, and the crowd is still 5,000, while the deaf man has not yet heard a sound. This is not gratitude as response. This is gratitude as declaration of reality. The second move is not asking for the miracle. It is speaking from a position where the miracle is already true. The third move, certainty. I knew that you always hear me. Knew. Past tense, not I believe you will, not I hope you act, not even I trust that. I knew. The relationship between the Father and the Son is described as a settled fact, not a present hope, not future confidence, historical certainty, as if the question of whether this prayer would be answered had already been resolved before the prayer was spoken. 3 structural moves, one of which, and only one, resembles what most people in a Western Christian tradition were taught to call prayer. Most of what I was taught to call prayer begins at a different point. Lord, I need. Please help me with. I'm asking you for. That structure begins with the deficit. It begins with scarcity, with the gap between what exists and what is needed. It is organized entirely around the problem. The architecture Jesus used begins somewhere else entirely. It begins with the Father. Before the need, before the evidence, before the outcome. That is the structural difference. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd found a cave near the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea. Inside the cave, in ceramic jars, were scrolls. 11 caves would be excavated over the following decade. More than 900 manuscript fragments recovered, the most significant archive of ancient Jewish texts ever discovered. Most people who know about the Dead Sea Scrolls know about the Isaiah Scroll, the Community Rule, the commentary on Habakkuk. What most people do not know about is a document designated 4Q503. It was found in Cave 4 at Qumran. Its formal classification in Dead Sea Scrolls scholarship is Daily Prayers. It dates to the 1st century before the Common Era. It is a morning prayer document, not a doctrinal text, not a prophecy, a liturgical document recording the specific structure used by a Jewish community at sunrise every morning in the century immediately preceding Jesus. The structure of each morning prayer in 4Q503 follows a pattern that does not vary. Time orientation, a specific identification of when the prayer occurs. The day, the position in the month, the relationship to sunrise. Opening declaration. Blessed be the God of Israel, who. A barakah, a formal blessing that begins not with petition, but with declaration. Not God I need. Blessed be God who has already. Acknowledgement of what God has already done. Not what is hoped for, but what is true. Body. Closing benediction. Communal response. Lawrence Schiffman at New York University, in Reclaiming the Dead Sea Scrolls, published by the Jewish Publication Society in 1994, writes, "These prayers reflect early Jewish liturgical practice centered around sunrise. Daily communal prayer at sunrise and sunset was a practice of priests in general." Daniel Falk at Penn State University, in Daily Sabbath, and festival prayers in the Dead Sea Scrolls published by Brill in 1998 provides the comprehensive academic documentation. The morning prayer structure at Qumran was not optional, it was not devotional, it was not reserved for particularly spiritual individuals, it was the daily beginning. And its structure, declaration of what God has already done, gratitude before evidence of the day's events, orientation before petition, is the structure that appears in every documented miracle sequence in the Gospels. Jesus was a Galilean Jew in the 1st century. He grew up inside this structure. Every morning, before the day began, gratitude before evidence was not a spiritual achievement for Jesus. It was the way the day started. You have prayed before, earnestly, specifically. In the dark, when the need was real and the stakes were high, and the words came from somewhere below the level of ordinary speech. You remember the structure of those prayers. They begin with the thing you need, the diagnosis, the decision, the debt, the relationship that has broken or is breaking. You bring it forward, you put it in words, you say it out loud or in the silence of your own chest. You describe it to God, and then you ask. That is the petition structure. It is not wrong. I am not telling you that it is wrong. I grew up on the petition structure. I have used it more times than I can number. But it is structured entirely around the problem. Recognition comes after the problem is introduced, if at all. Gratitude comes at the end, if it comes, as a closing gesture after the request has been made. Certainty is almost never present in the petition structure, because you are asking, and asking implies uncertainty about the outcome. Now look at the sequence Jesus uses. Recognition first. The relationship is established before the need is named, before any mention of what is missing or broken or required. Gratitude second. Before any evidence, before the stone has been rolled away and anyone has walked out. Certainty third. Not as conclusion, but as premise. The knowledge that the Father hears, spoken as settled fact before the miracle occurs. The petition begins with what is absent. The architecture Jesus used begins with what is present. The petition requires evidence before gratitude. The architecture Jesus used places gratitude before evidence. I am not telling you which to use. I am telling you what the text says. And what the text says is that these are not the same structure. Vermes at the University of Oxford, in Jesus, the Jew, published by Collins in 1973, makes an argument that reshaped how serious scholars approach the historical Jesus. His argument: Jesus was not a theological innovator operating outside the traditions of Second Temple Judaism. He was a Galilean Jew embedded in those traditions. Specifically, in the charismatic healing tradition of the Hasidim, the holy men of 1st century Galilee, for whom prayer and miracle were understood as structurally connected. Not miracle as supernatural interruption. Miracle as the natural consequence of correct structural practice. Vermes places Jesus within a specific lineage. Honi, the circle drawer, who drew a circle in the dust and stood inside it and refused to leave until rain came. Hanina Bendosa, who healed from a distance through prayer in a tradition that bears unmistakable formal resemblance to the gospel accounts. These were not exceptional mystics operating outside normal Jewish religious life. They were practitioners of a tradition in which morning prayer was not separate from miracle, in which the daily structure of orientation, gratitude, and certainty was the architecture from which healing emerged. E.P. Sanders at Duke and Oxford, in The Historical Figure of Jesus, published by Penguin in 1993, is more conservative than Vermes, but unambiguous on the observance question. The Shema was said every morning and evening. This is the bedrock of 1st century Jewish religious practice. The Shema, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. A direct declaration, not a petition, not a request, a statement of what is true, spoken into the morning before any need was named. Sanders. There is no evidence Jesus deviated from standard Jewish religious practice. Which means, every morning, before anything else, Jesus stood and spoke a declaration of what was already the case. Not a request, not a petition, a statement of reality. And the Birkot Hashachar, the morning blessings recorded in the Berachot tractate of the Talmud, reflecting first-century practice, follows the same architecture. It is a series of specific acknowledgments spoken upon waking before any request is made. Each blessing names a specific restoration that has already occurred. Blessed are you, Lord our God, who opens the eyes of the blind, who frees those who are bound, who raises up the bowed. The structure is gratitude as declaration, not gratitude as response. The restoration is named as already done. The blessing is for what is already true. Morning prayer in the tradition Jesus inhabited began with what had already been given, not with what was needed, not with what was missing, with what was already in the structure of the relationship with the Father, already restored, from which the day then proceeded. J.J. Benítez has spent 4 decades investigating the historical Jesus. His Caballo de Troya series, 10 volumes spanning from 1984 to 2016, is built on an unusual claim that I will be explicit about. Benítez does not operate within the verification standards I apply to Vermes or Sanders. His methodology is not academic. I am always clear about that. But across 10 volumes of narrative, Benítez makes a consistent observation that the academic literature approaches carefully and the Sunday sermon series almost never reaches. He places Jesus rising before dawn, not at dawn. Before it. Before the household was awake. Before any of the 12 had opened their eyes. In darkness, in the specific cold that precedes the Galilean sunrise, Jesus goes to high ground, to a solitary place, to somewhere he will not be interrupted, and remains. Benítez describes this practice not as meditation, not as petition, not as preparation for the day's ministry. He describes it as what he calls recalibration with the Father. The sunrise in Benítez's account is not atmospheric. It is a threshold. The pre-dawn time is the operative time, the period before the events of the day could claim his attention, before any need had been named, before any request could organize his orientation. What happens in that time in Benítez's account is exactly what the gospel miracle sequences document. Recognition. The Father is addressed directly, intimately, in the full certainty of relationship. Gratitude. Not for specific outcomes, but for the fundamental truth of the connection. Before anything has happened in the day. Before any evidence of the day's shape. Certainty, the knowledge, not hope, not faith, understood as future confidence, but settled operational knowledge, that the Father hears. Benítez's most consistent observation across the 10 volumes is this: Jesus never waited for confirmation before acting from certainty. The certainty preceded the event. Always. Not as a spiritual posture, as an operational position from which action was taken. The sunrise was the moment of arrival at that position. Before the requests of the day, before the crowds, before Lazarus needed raising. Think of one thing you have been carrying. Not the worst thing you have ever faced, the thing that is present this week. The one that surfaces in the first few seconds of wakefulness before the day takes over. You have probably prayed about it. Maybe you prayed about it this morning. The structure of that prayer. You named the thing. You described the need. You asked for an outcome. That is the petition structure. Now hold the same thing in mind and consider a different sequence. Not, Lord, I need help with this, Father. Just the name, the relationship, the immediate intimate address that implies the door was never closed, not a request to follow. Just the address. Now this. I thank you that you have already heard this. Not, I hope you will act. Not, I believe you might. The past tense, the gratitude for what is already real, spoken before any evidence of it. And then this, I know you always hear me. Not as something you are trying to believe, as a statement of settled fact. The way you would say, I know the sun rose this morning. Not because you need to believe it, but because you have that kind of relationship with evidence. Those are the three moves: recognition, gratitude, certainty. They take approximately 15 seconds, and they are structurally different from the prayer most people in this audience were taught. Not better because I am telling you they are better. Different because the text shows they are different. And the text shows that every verifiable miracle in the canonical Gospels follows from this structure, not from the other one. The mechanics are not the same. About 8 months before I began this investigation, I went through what I can only describe as functional paralysis. Not a crisis, not a breakdown. Nothing dramatic that I could point to and explain to anyone. The ordinary accumulation of difficult things I am not going to enumerate, that erodes the morning, the way water erodes rock. Slowly, without announcement, until one day you reach for something and it is not there. I stopped doing anything in the first 15 minutes of the day except looking at my phone. Not because of the phone, because the morning felt like it had already decided something before I got to participate. Like the day was already running, and I was catching up to it rather than beginning it. I want to be honest about this. I was a person who had studied Jesus's prayer practice for 2 decades. I had written about it, I had taught it in adult education series, and I had stopped practicing it. I was reading John chapter 11 for the 3rd time in a week when I wrote in the margin, "He thanks before," and I did not immediately go back to practicing anything. I sat with the observation, I cross-referenced the Gospels, I confirmed the pattern, and then one morning, not as a spiritual decision, as an experiment, I tried it before getting out of bed. I did not say it out loud, quietly, privately. Recognition, a single word, not a formal address, just Father. Gratitude, one sentence, not thank you for this day, a generic closing. One sentence for something I knew was already true. Not something I was hoping for, something I had evidence for. Certainty, one sentence, stated in the past tense, as if the thing I was carrying had already been addressed, not because I had evidence that it had been, because that is where the structure begins. I kept a log, not mystical, not a prayer journal, a factual record. What I noticed, how the morning proceeded, what changed in my orientation to the things I was carrying. I am not going to tell you what I found in the log. I am not making a claim about outcomes. I am not drawing causal lines I cannot verify. What I am telling you is this. I tried it. I kept a log. Make of that what you will. The investigation that followed? 4 Gospels, Dead Sea Scrolls, Vermes, Sanders, Benítez, began at the desk of a former history teacher who had spent 2 decades studying a thing and 8 months not doing it, who picked it back up one morning and wrote in the margin of his Bible, "He thanks before." That is what I am giving you. Not a guarantee. A structure. The same structure. Tried by the same Nathan, who is telling you he kept a log. Here is what the institutional church did with the architecture Jesus practiced. It preserved it. That sounds like praise. It is not quite praise. It preserved the architecture, the words, the structural moves, the sequence. and replaced the function. Open the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven. That is the first move. Recognition. Not, Lord, we come to you with our needs. Not, Almighty God, we humbly request. The immediate, intimate address. The Abba address. The child's word. The church preserved that. Give us this day our daily bread. That word give in the Greek, doulos, a second-person singular aorist imperative, is a command form. Not, we hope you will give. Not, please consider giving. The form implies present tense, already in motion provision. Not future petition, but present expectation of something already underway. The church preserved that. Hallowed be thy name. Recognition. The name is already holy. The declaration precedes any request. Thy kingdom come. Certainty. The kingdom is coming regardless of what the petitioner adds. These structural moves were preserved, but the function was reframed. The Lord's Prayer in modern practice, in the liturgy, in the catechism, in the Sunday morning service, is presented as petition, as asking, as the structure of humble request from below. The recognition at the opening is understood as respectful approach to authority. The certainty embedded in the grammatical forms was gradually interpreted as the appropriate confidence of the faithful believer, not the operational position from which miracle proceeds, not the structural prerequisite for what the sequence delivers. Appropriate confidence. The words Jesus taught his disciples carry the same three structural moves he used at every documented miracle. Recognition first, gratitude embedded in the acknowledgement of what is already true, certainty in the imperative forms and the past tense framing. The church preserved the prayer. It retired the sequence. The first-century Jewish morning structure that Jesus inhabited. Declaration first. Gratitude before evidence. The Shema, spoken at dawn before any request was made, was left in the scrolls until 1947, when the scrolls were found, and the morning prayer document from Cave 4 confirmed what the gospel pattern had been saying for 2,000 years. The gratitude comes before the miracle, not after, before. Here is what I want to leave you with. Not the Dead Sea Scrolls, not Schiffman or Sanders or Vermes or Benítez. The structure. 3 moves, 3 words if you collapse them to their elements. Father, thank you. Already done. Not a formula. I am not giving you a formula. Jesus was not performing a formula. The structure of what he did is documented precisely because it was not mechanical. It was relational, it was operational. It emerged from genuine orientation toward the Father before the day took possession of the available attention. But the mechanics are the mechanics, and the mechanics are in the text. Recognition first. The relationship before the need. The immediate address, Abba, that implies direct access rather than approach from a distance. Not, Lord, hear my prayer. Father, the word that a child uses when the door is understood to be permanently open. Gratitude second. Before evidence. Before the stone has moved, before the 5 loaves have multiplied, before the deaf man has heard, the gratitude is spoken into the silence before anything has happened. Not because the outcome is guaranteed, but because the relationship in which the outcome is already real is the starting position, not the hoped-for destination. Certainty. Third. Past tense. I knew that you always hear me. Not aspiration, not confidence as psychological posture. Settled operational knowledge, the kind that precedes action rather than following from result. The same knowing that Benítez documents across 10 volumes. Jesus never waited for confirmation before acting from certainty. The certainty was the beginning, not the conclusion. 3 moves. Consistent across John 11, Matthew 14, John 6, Mark 7. Consistent with the morning prayer structure of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Consistent with the Birkut Hashachar recited before any request was made. Consistent with the Shema spoken at the threshold of every morning for 3,000 years. The institutional church preserved the Lord's Prayer and retired the sequence. It gave you the words. It did not give you the structure the words came from. And the structure is the part that precedes the miracle. Not the words, the architecture. Father, not as formal address, as the direct word of a child who has never had reason to doubt the door is open. Thank you, not as closing sentiment, as statement of what is already real before your eyes can confirm it. Already done. Not as affirmation you are rehearsing to convince yourself, as the settled position from which action proceeds. Those 3 moves are available every morning at 6:12 a.m. before the day takes over. Before the list activates. Before any of the things you are carrying have had a chance to name themselves. The alarm. 6:12 a.m. The ceiling. The weight is still there. The one that arrived before you were awake. The one you did not choose. But now there is something available before you get up. Not a spiritual exercise, not a religious performance. A structural sequence, 2,000 years old, documented in 4 separate Gospels, corroborated by the morning prayer archive of the 1st century, practiced by a man whose documented results are the most extraordinary in recorded religious history. 3 words. Father. Thank you. Already done. You say them before the day takes possession. Not out loud, if that is not how you do things. Quietly, privately, in the 15 seconds before your feet touch the floor. Recognition, not Lord, I come before you. Just Father, the intimate word, the one that implies the door was never closed. Gratitude, not thank you for this day. One thing you know is already true. Spoken as if the thing you are carrying has already been addressed. Not because you have evidence that it has been, because that is where the sequence begins. Certainty. 1 sentence. Past tense. I know you hear me, not as something you are trying to believe, as a statement of what has always been the case. 3 moves. The same 3 moves documented in every recorded miracle in the 4 Gospels. The same 3 moves embedded in the morning prayer structure, preserved in the caves above the Dead Sea. The same 3 moves that Benítez documents Jesus practicing before the household was awake, in the cold before the Galilean sunrise, at the threshold between the night and the day that was about to make its demands. The architecture is available. Before the alarm finishes sounding, before the first thought of the day is fully formed, before the weight has had a chance to announce itself. 3 words. That is it. That is the question. This is Nathan. Forbidden Gospels.